They said it was the biggest blizzard to hit the Canadian Rockies in 40 years. But for John Merrick, it wasn't the snow that hurt, it was the silence that came before it. Out there, among miles of pine and frozen streams, his cabin sat like a forgotten thought, wood walls worn thin from decades of storms, a roof patched so many times it looked like an old scar that refused to heal. John had built that place with his own hands after the war. He thought isolation would be peace. It turned out to be something else entirely. Every winter, he'd watch the sky turn gray, the wind shift, and the first flakes fall, and with each storm, something inside him stirred a pressure he couldn't name. Tonight, it returned again. The wind had picked up by dusk. Outside, the pines bowed under the weight of snow. The radio in the corner crackled with static, then the voice of a weatherman, calm and detached. Heavy snowfall warnings remain in effect across Alberta. Visibility near zero. Stay indoors if you can. John turned the dial off. The hum of the old generator filled the room instead. He sat by the fire, a tin mug of coffee in his hands. Steam rising into the dim light. The air smelled of pine wood and iron like the barracks had years ago. He tried not to think about that, but memory doesn't ask for permission. A sound echoed in his mind, a dog barking, Rex, always ahead of him, ears sharp, tail steady. That German shepherd had saved more lives than most soldiers ever did, and in the end, he'd given his own for John's. John blinked hard, staring into the fire. He could still see the desert dust, still feel the weight of Rex's body in his arms, still hear the final gunshot that ended it all. PTSD, the doctors called it. He called it the aftershock. The war had ended, but the explosions never stopped. They just went quiet enough to make you think they had. The clock struck 9. Outside, the snow thickened. It pressed against the cabin windows like a living thing. John stood, his joints aching from years of cold and age. He moved to the door, checked the latch, then leaned his forehead against the wood. For a moment, he thought he heard something, a faint cry buried in the wind. He froze, listened, nothing, just the storm. He went back to the fire, cast in another log, and sat down again. But the sound came once more, this time clearer. A weak, broken whimper, a dog's whimper. John stood up fast, the mug slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. The cry came again, distant, somewhere beyond the tree line. He grabbed his coat, his flashlight, and the old rifle that leaned by the door. When he stepped outside, the cold hit him like a wall. The wind clawed at his face, snow cutting into his skin like shards of glass. He raised the flashlight, its beam vanishing into white. Hello? His voice disappeared into the storm. He moved forward, boots sinking deep into the drifts. The cabin light faded behind him, only the howl of the wind remained. There it was again, that cry, closer this time, desperate. He followed it past the frozen creek, through the ghostly silhouettes of trees. Branches creaked, bending under snow. The forest groaned with the weight of the storm, and then he saw it, a shape in the snow. At first it looked like a shadow. Then it moved. A dog, half buried, trembling, its fur matted with ice. A collar glinted beneath the frost. John dropped to his knees beside it. Hey there, boy, he murmured, voice shaking. He brushed the snow away, checked for breath. The dog's chest rose weak but steady. He hesitated, staring into its face. For a moment, time folded, and it wasn't this dog he saw, but Rex. Same breed, same eyes, the kind that looked straight through you, as if to say, I remembered you. John lifted the animal into his arms. It whimpered softly, its head pressing against his chest. He turned back toward the faint glow of the cabin light, now blurred by snow. It took him nearly 20 minutes to fight his way home. By the time he got there, both man and dog were half frozen. He laid the animal down near the fire, wrapped it in an old wool blanket, and rubbed its paws to bring warmth back. Easy now, John whispered. You're safe. You're safe here. The dog stirred, eyes flickering open. One ear stood up, the other drooped. It looked around the room at the fire, the chair, the man who had saved it, and let out a low, grateful sigh. John sat back, heart pounding. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. He reached out, gently touching the dog's collar. The tag was old, worn down by time and weather, but he could still make out the letters, faint but clear. Rex. The wind howled again outside, but John didn't move. He just sat there, hand resting on the dog's side, staring into the fire as the storm raged on. It was as if the past had clawed its way back through the snow, not to haunt him this time, but to ask him something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe purpose, maybe just company. He didn't know, but for the first time in a long time, John Merrick wasn't alone in the storm. By morning, the storm had not stopped. It had only changed shape. The wind no longer screamed, it whispered, the kind of whisper that gets inside your head and reminds you how small you are. Outside the cabin, the world was nothing but white, a single color stretching to the horizon, erasing everything: roads, trees, even time itself. John Merrick stood by the window, his breath fogging the glass. The dog from last night, the one with Rex's name, lay curled near the fire, wrapped in a blanket. It was breathing easier now, but something in its body still trembled, like it carried the memory of cold even as warmth returned. John poured himself coffee, black, bitter, and barely hot, then turned toward the door. He couldn't shake the feeling that something out there wasn't finished yet. He reached for his old coat, the same olive-green field jacket he'd worn the day the world ended, or at least his part of it. He hadn't touched it in years. It still smelled faintly of oil and smoke. He strapped on his boots, took his walking stick from beside the door, and slung the rifle across his shoulder. The dog lifted its head, eyes questioning. "Stay," John said softly. "I'll be back soon." He hesitated, then set a log closer to the fire before stepping out. The door shut behind him with a dull thud, sealing in the last of the warmth. Outside, the cold hit harder than before. The air was so sharp it felt like it could carve the inside of his lungs. Snow crunched beneath his boots, each step sinking deep. The sky was a low ceiling of gray, pressing down on the mountains. John moved slowly, leaning on the stick for balance. His breath came out in clouds that instantly froze to his beard. The forest looked unfamiliar, all the landmarks buried beneath snowdrifts taller than a man. Even the creek was gone, replaced by a white, unbroken plain. But then he saw it, a faint streak of red across the snow. Blood. It wasn't much, just a few drops, scattered like the remains of a memory, but in a place where everything else was white. It might as well have been a map. He followed it. The wind picked up again, tugging at his coat, stinging his eyes every few steps. He'd stop, listen, the forest answering back only with silence. Somewhere above him, a branch snapped under the weight of ice and crashed down, startling him enough to grip his rifle tight. The blood trail grew thicker, then in the distance, a shape. Metal, a truck, half buried, tilted on its side in a ditch, its front end smashed against a fallen pine. The windshield was shattered, doors twisted open like broken wings. John approached slowly, boots crunching over glass and snow. The engine was cold. It hadn't been running for hours. He peered inside. No driver, no body, but there was something else. A metal cage, or what used to be one, lying crushed in the back, its bars bent, latch snapped. Inside, a few tufts of fur and the dark stains of blood. John's stomach tightened. He lifted the edge of a tarp that had been thrown over the wreck, and then he froze. A German shepherd, a mother, dead but not alone. Her body was curled protectively around something small, hidden in the crook of her legs. A pup, barely moving. For a long moment, John didn't breathe. The world around him went silent again. No wind, no snow, no sound at all. He knelt beside them, his knees sinking into the cold. The mother's fur was stiff with ice, but her position told a story clearer than words. She had died shielding her young, blocking the cold, the snow, the end. John reached in carefully, fingers trembling, and brushed the pup's side. At first it didn't react. Then, faintly, a breath, a weak twitch of life. "Hey, easy now," he whispered. "You're all right, little one." He pulled off his gloves and cupped the pup in his bare hands. Its body was cold as stone, but under the fur, he could feel the faintest flicker of warmth, like a candle that refused to go out. John pressed it to his chest, under his coat, tucking it against the fabric where his heart used to feel strong. The pup whimpered softly, almost inaudible, but it was enough. He looked at the mother again. Something in him wanted to stay, to dig, to bury, to honor. But the storm was closing in fast, and he knew what cold did to the living. He took one last look, the kind that says, "I see you, and I won't forget," then stood up and turned back toward the cabin. The walk home was harder than before. The wind had shifted, and every step felt like pushing against a wall of knives. Snow rose to his knees, his hands numbed even through the coat. Once, he slipped, nearly fell, clutching the pup tighter as if to guard it from the whole world. Halfway there, he stopped to catch his breath. His heart was hammering, his breath ragged. The weight of years pressed on him, the kind you can't train out of you bones. But then he felt it, a tiny movement against his chest, a heartbeat, steady, determined, alive. And somehow, that was enough to keep going. By the time he reached the cabin, the sky had gone dark again. He pushed through the door, collapsed inside, and kicked it shut behind him. The dog by the fire lifted its head, ears twitching, eyes alert. John sank down beside the fire, opened his coat, and gently unwrapped a pup. It was barely breathing, but breathing nonetheless. He rubbed its body with an old towel, held it close to the flames, whispered quietly like he was afraid the silence might swallow his words. "Hang in there, kid, you made it this far." The older dog moved closer, sniffing the pup, then lay down beside it as if understanding something without needing to be told. John watched them both, his chest heavy, his eyes tired. The fire cracked softly, throwing gold light across the room. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, 3 lives broken, lost, and somehow found again shared the same fragile warmth, for the first time in decades. John Merrick felt like the universe had given him a task worth finishing. The cabin was silent, except for the fire. John Merrick knelt beside it, his hands trembling, the skin raw from the cold. On the rug before him lay the tiny body of the German shepherd pup he'd carried through the storm. Its fur was wet, its breathing almost invisible. Every few seconds it gave a faint twitch, like it was fighting something he couldn't see. John had seen death before too many times to count, but this one, this fragile thing in front of him, felt different. Maybe because it hadn't even had a chance to live yet. Maybe because saving it felt like saving something he'd lost long ago. He stoked the fire higher, feeding it with the last of his dry wood. The flames roared, throwing light across the walls lined with old photos and medals dulled by dust. He grabbed a wool blanket and an old towel, wrapping the pup gently, rubbing it in small circles. Not too fast, not too hard, just enough to remind it what warmth feels like. "Come on, kid," he whispered. "You're not done yet." The pup didn't move. He remembered the field medics shouting over mortar fire, "Keep pressure, Merrick, don't let go." He remembered holding a soldier's hand that had already gone cold. And now, in this cabin, decades later, the same fight replayed itself, only this time, the patient weighed less than 5 pounds and had no name. He filled a pot with water and set it near the fire. Watching the steam rise, he dipped the towel into the warm water, wrung it out, and placed it along the pup's sides. He rubbed again, gently, rhythmically. He didn't talk, just breathed, listening for any sign of life. Minutes turned to an hour. Outside, the wind began to ease, replaced by the crackle of ice falling from the roof. John's face was lit by the fire, deep lines, hollow eyes, and a kind of stubbornness that had outlived everything else. He leaned close, the pup's chest rose barely, then again, and then, a sound. A whimper, soft, barely audible, but it cut through the cabin like a flare in the dark. John froze. Then he exhaled, a shaky laugh breaking through his breath. "There we go, that's it." He rubbed faster now, whispering nonsense, the kind of things a man says when he's afraid hope will hear him and run away. After another few minutes, the pup's legs twitched, its head moved, slow and clumsy, like it was remembering how to exist. Its eyes remained shut, but its body had found the rhythm of breathing again. John sat back on his heels, exhausted. His eyes burned from smoke, from fatigue, maybe from something else. He hadn't cried since the day Rex died, not even when the war ended, but now, tears came anyway, quiet and uninvited. He wiped them with the back of his hand and muttered, "You stubborn little thing, you just couldn't let go, could you?" He reached for a small bottle from a shelf, powdered milk for emergencies. He mixed it with warm water, grabbed a dropper, and tested the temperature on his wrist. Then, holding the pup in one arm, he gently placed a drop at the edge of its mouth. Nothing. He tried again, just a touch more. This time, the pup's tongue flickered. Then, slowly, it swallowed. "Good boy," John said softly. "Attaboy." It took 40 minutes before the pup managed to drink more than a spoonful. By the end of it, its breathing had steadied, and its small chest rose with something resembling strength. John sat back, the exhaustion hitting him like a wave. He rested against the wall, the fire warming his legs, the pup asleep on his lap. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a tomb. It felt alive. He watched the firelight dance across the pup's fur. His shimmered gold and black, the same pattern Rex once had. Same ears, same stubborn look. Even in sleep. "Damn it," John muttered. "You look just like him." The name hung in the air, Rex. He hadn't said it out loud in years. Every time he thought of it, he'd see the blast, the sand, the chaos, and Rex running toward it. He'd tried to forget. He'd buried the medals, the photos, the leash. But memory has a way of finding cracks to crawl through. And now, lying on his lap, breathing softly, was a reminder carved from the same shape. Hours passed. The fire burned low, the storm outside fading into stillness. The pup stirred, then nestled closer into John's jacket. John smiled faintly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You made it through the storm, kid. You earned yourself a name." He thought for a moment, staring at the last embers in the fireplace, each one glowing, fading, glowing again. Then he said it, echo. He didn't know why, exactly. Maybe because the name fit the sound that had brought him out into the snow. Maybe because the pup felt like a voice from somewhere else, a voice that refused to die. "You're the echo," he murmured, "of the storm and of Rex." The words broke something open inside him. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't guilt. It was something lighter, a fragile kind of peace. John added more wood to the fire, adjusted the blanket around Echo, and sat watching until the flames steadied. Outside, dawn was creeping in, turning the snow from gray to blue. He could hear water dripping from the roof, a sign that the worst had passed. He reached down, gently brushing the pup's fur. Echo's breathing was soft, steady, alive. John whispered, "Welcome home, soldier." He leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened. The storm was gone. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something new, and in that silence, if you listened closely enough, you could almost hear its faint heartbeat of life returning, an echo rising from the ashes. The cabin was silent except for the soft crackle of the fireplace and the faint rustle of Echo's breathing. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a landscape covered in snow and silence, the kind of silence that almost felt holy. John sat on the floor beside the fire, legs stretched out, his back against the old log wall. Echo lay next to him, wrapped in a torn army blanket. The pup's chest rose and fell in small, uneven rhythms. Each breath was a reminder, fragile, but alive. John reached down and ran his calloused hand over the dog's fur. It was rough in some places, soft in others, like scorched earth meeting new grass. "You're tougher than you looked," he murmured. The puppy stirred at the sound of his voice, letting out a faint whine. John smiled for the first time in months, maybe years. It wasn't a big smile, but enough to remind his face that it still remembered how the next few days followed a rhythm John hadn't felt since his days in the army. He woke up early, chopped wood, boiled water, and made food for himself. And now, for Echo, the dog was still weak, barely able to stand. But its eyes followed John wherever he went. There was something in those eyes that reminded him of loyalty, of purpose. "Easy now," John said one morning as Echo tried to take a few shaky steps toward the door. "You're not ready for the outside yet." He placed his large hand on the puppy's head and gently guided it back toward the blanket. "We'll take it slow. That's how we survive out here, slow and steady." He spoke to Echo often, maybe more than he spoke to any human in years. He told stories he'd never told anyone, about the desert, about the heat, about the men he fought beside and the ones who never made it back. Echo didn't understand the words, but it didn't matter. The listening mattered. The presence mattered. One night, as the wind howled outside again, John found himself staring into the flames. The flickering light painted the walls with ghostly shapes, memories he thought he'd buried. He saw Rex, the German shepherd who'd been more than a companion during deployment. Rex, who'd found buried IEDs when others couldn't. Rexes who'd saved his unit more than once. And Rex, who'd died because John had hesitated for just 1 second too long. He remembered the explosion, the deafening roar, the searing light, the sand turning into fire. He remembered Rex's bark, sharp and desperate, a warning swallowed by chaos, then silence. When John came to, half buried in rubble, the first thing he saw was Rex lying motionless beside him. He'd screamed until his voice broke, but no one heard. That moment had followed him home, through every sleepless night, every bottle drained, every scar he tried to ignore. A soft sound brought him back, a small, uncertain bark. Echo was awake, sitting near the fire, staring at him. For a second, it felt like Rex was there again, watching over him from another time, another life. John swallowed hard, blinking away the sting behind his eyes. "You look just like him when you do that," he whispered. Echo tilted its head. "Yeah, you wouldn't know. You weren't there." He chuckled dryly. "Lucky you." He reached for a small tin cup, took a sip of coffee gone cold, and sighed. Maybe you're here for a reason, huh? Maybe someone up there decided I don't get to quit just yet." Echo crawled closer, resting its head on his knee. John froze. That simple act, that tiny gesture of trust cracked something open inside him. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. For the first time in years, the soldier felt seen. Days turned into weeks. Snow melted into soft mud. The cabin that once felt like a tomb began to feel like a home again. John started taking Echo outside for short walks. The dog's legs grew stronger. Its tail wagged more often. It learned commands quickly: sit, stay, heel. The old muscle memory returned to John's voice, the firmness, the rhythm of command. But this time it wasn't about war, it was about care. Sometimes he'd find himself standing in the yard watching Echo chase falling snowflakes, and he'd feel something he hadn't let himself feel in years: peace. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, John sat by the fire again. Echo was curled up beside him, snoring softly. He looked at the dog and said quietly, "You know, I used to believe God forgot about me after the war." The fire popped softly, like it was listening. "I thought maybe I was supposed to die out there. Maybe that explosion should have taken me to." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "But then you showed up, out of nowhere, broken, half dead like me." He reached down and stroked Echo's fur, feeling the warmth beneath his fingers. "Maybe," he said, his words trembling, "maybe he sent you so I could learn how to forgive myself." Echo stirred, pressing closer to him. John smiled faintly, tears glinting in the firelight. "Guess we're both learning to live again." Outside, the wind had quieted. The forest stood still, as if holding its breath. The snow reflected the soft orange glow from the cabin window, a small flickering light in a vast, silent wilderness. And inside, two souls, one man, one dog sat together in the quiet grace of survival, not as a soldier and a stray, but as the beings who had found each other in the ruins of what used to be. And maybe that was enough. The snow began to melt slowly that year, not with thunder or storms, but with patience. Drops fell from the eaves, tiny rivers ran down the path, and the air that once bit at the lungs now smelled faintly of pine and earth. Inside the cabin, something else had thawed too. Echo had grown taller, stronger, more alert. The little creature John had once cradled in a blanket was now asleep, bright-eyed shepherd with muscles that rippled beneath its fur. When it ran like the wind had finally found a body. John stood by the cabin door, watching the dog circle the clearing. "You're faster every damn day," he muttered with pride. Echo stopped, barked once, sharp and confident, before bounding off again. It had been months since John's voice had sounded like that. Alive, teasing, almost happy. Their days found rhythm again. Each morning, John whistled, and Echo came trotting up, tail wagging, eyes gleaming with expectation. They trained together, not for battle this time, but for life. John would toss an old glove deep into the woods, find it, Echo, and the dog would vanish into the trees, nose low, tail flicking, only to return moments later with the glove proudly clenched in its teeth. John laughed, really laughed, the kind of laugh that startled the forest birds into flight. "Good boy. You're a damn genius. You know that," Echo barked, chest puffed, like it understood every word. The cabin, once haunted by silence, now echoed with the sounds of life. The crackle of fire, the thud of paws on wood, the faint hum of an old radio John had fixed just to hear something human. Sometimes he'd hum along to the country tunes that faded in and out through the static. Sometimes he even sang badly, but Echo didn't seem to mind. It was a small world, but it was theirs. At dusk, they'd walk the perimeter of the woods. Echo would trot a few steps ahead, scanning, ears twitching at every noise, a born guardian. John would follow behind, rifle slung over his shoulder, boots crunching over frost. The routine reminded him of patrols he used to run in another lifetime, but now, the war in his head felt quieter. He wasn't Sergeant Walker out here, he was just John, a man with a dog, and for the first time in years. That felt like enough. One night, Echo didn't return when called. John stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand. "Echo, here boy." The forest was still, save for the sound of something rustling near the tree line. Then, out of the darkness, Echo appeared, tail wagging, head held high. In its jaws dangled something limp and furry. John frowned and knelt down as the dog dropped its gift at his feet. A dead mink. He stared for a moment, torn between disgust and awe. "Well, look at you first, kill, nah?" Echo barked proudly, chest out like a soldier reporting success. John sighed, shaking his head. "You're turning into quite the hunter." He picked up the mink with a stick, tossed it aside gently, and scratched Echo behind the ear. "Guess that's nature. You're built for more than cuddles." As he looked at the dog, he felt a small pang of recognition. That fire in Echo's eyes, the instinct, the focus, it reminded him of his younger self. The one who lived on adrenaline, the one who never slept. "Don't lose your softness, kid," he murmured. "The wand will try to take it." The following morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, and for a brief moment, life felt perfect. John brewed coffee, sat by the fire, and watched Echo dose at his feet. The smell of pine wood smoke mixed with the sharp scent of spring air. He thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is peace. Then the phone rang, a sound so ordinary, yet so alien in the quiet of that cabin. John froze. He hadn't heard it in weeks, maybe months. The device sat on the small table by the window, dusty, forgotten. He hesitated before answering. "Yeah." A voice came through, gentle. Uncertain, Dad. He closed his eyes. Clara, for a second. He couldn't breathe. Dad, I've been trying to reach you, she said softly. You disappeared again. Are you okay? John swallowed hard. I'm fine, just keeping to myself for a bit. There was a pause on the line. He could hear the faint hum of city noise behind her, the kind of sound that used to define his life, but now felt foreign. Are you alone out there? She asked. He looked at Echo, who had lifted his head, eyes curious. Not exactly, John said with a faint smile. Got some company? You found someone, something like that, he said quietly. A dog. She chuckled in disbelief. You have a dog? Yeah, guess life's got jokes left to tell. Her voice softened. I'm glad you're not alone, Dad. He wanted to say more, to tell her how the dog had saved him, how it gave him a reason to wake up again, but the words caught somewhere between pride and fear. Listen, Clara, he finally said, his tone shifting. Don't worry about me. Okay. I've got what I need out here. There was another pause. I was hoping you might come visit. It's been years. He stared out the window at the sunlight glinting off the melting snow, at Echo playing near the woodpile, and for the first time since she'd said his name, he felt something twist deep inside, because the moment she said visit, his peace began to tremble. The world outside, the one he'd run from, was reaching for him again. He cleared his throat. We'll see, sweetheart. Spring just got here. Got some work to do around the place. Okay, she said, voice soft with disappointment. I love you. Dad, I love you too. When the call ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Echo walked over, resting its head on his lap. John stared into the fire, hand absently stroking the dog's fur. She's the last piece of that old life, you know, he whispered, and I don't know if I can face it again. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Inside, John sat still, torn between the peace he'd built and the past that refused to stay buried. Echo nudged his hand gently, eyes bright and steady, as if to say, You're not alone, not anymore. John smiled faintly. Yeah, he murmured. I know, boy, I know, but deep down, he also knew that peace never lasted forever, and somewhere beyond the trees, another storm was already gathering.
The knock came just as the evening light began to fade. John wasn't expecting anyone out here. No one ever came uninvited. Echo growled low from beneath the table, ears perked, body stiff. Another knock, firm, familiar. John set his mug down, reached for the rifle, leaning by the wall, and opened the door just wide enough to see. A man stood there tall, wearing a brown parka dusted with road salt. His eyes were sharp, but kind. The kind of eyes that had seen too much, just like John's. Jesus.
John, the man said, exhaling steam, still paranoid after all these years. John squinted. It took a moment, but then recognition hit. Marcus Lee. The man grinned. In the flesh. John lowered the rifle, though his grip stayed tight. I thought you were still down in Edmonton. Got a vet clinic there, Marcus said, stepping inside. But I do field visits for wildlife up north. Heard about your little rescue mission. Word travels fast, John muttered. Not faster than a government database, Marcus replied quietly. Echo emerged from under the table. Curious but cautious, Marcus knelt down, palm open. Hey there, soldier. The dog didn't bark, just watched him, eyes deep, alert, assessing. Then, slowly, Echo sniffed his hand. Beautiful animal, Marcus said softly. Strong posture, symmetrical gait. She's not just any shepherd. John folded his arms. What are you getting at? Marcus stood, his expression darkening. You found her in a storm, right? Near the old highway. That's right. Then she's not a stray, Marcus sighed. She's property of the Federal Canine Division, a next-generation service dog. Her chip's still active in the registry. John stared at him, the words landing heavy. You're saying she belongs to the government? I'm saying she was part of a classified training unit near Jasper, Marcus replied. Some of those dogs were stolen in transit last winter. Someone sold them off to black market handlers. She must have escaped during transport. He paused, meeting John's eyes. Keeping her is technically a federal offense. The room fell silent. Only the fire cracked in the background. John finally said, You gotta be kidding me. Marcus shook his head. I wish I was. They sat at the table as the night deepened, a single lamp between them casting long shadows across the wood. John poured 2 cups of coffee. Marcus stared into his before speaking again. John, I get it. You saved her life. But this, he gestured toward Echo, now sleeping by the fire, this could get messy fast. There are papers, ownership trails, chain of custody reports. If someone finds out, they won't. John cut him off. Marcus frowned. It's not that simple. These dogs attract. John, there's a reason her signal's been pinging in this area. John's jaw tightened. So that's why you came. You're not just visiting an old friend. Marcus looked down. They reached out, asked me to check in. I volunteered because I didn't want some agent showing up at your door. So what now? Marcus hesitated. Now you let her go. The words hit like a gunshot. John leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing. You're out of your damn mind. John, no. Listen to me. His voice rose, raw and breaking. I found her half dead in the snow. I fed her. I watched her fight her way back from nothing. That dog's family. Marcus's tone softened. What didn't waver? You saved her. Yeah, but that doesn't make her yours. John slammed his fist on the table. Don't you dare say that to me. You weren't there, Marcus. You didn't see her shaking in my arms. Echo stirred, ears twitching at his raised voice. Marcus spoke quietly, like a medic trying to calm a wounded soldier. I know what Rex meant to you. I know what you lost. John's eyes flickered, pain flashing behind them. You don't know a damn thing. I was there. Remember, Marcus said gently. Kandahar 2009, the explosion. Rex didn't die because you failed him. He died saving you. John turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. His voice was barely above a whisper, and I couldn't even dig him out. Just stood there screaming his name. Marcus sighed, the weight of shared ghosts filling the air. You've been carrying that guilt too long, old friend. But Echo, she's not Rex. You can't make her his ghost. John's voice cracked. She's the first thing that made me feel alive again. Don't take that from me. Marcus leaned forward. I'm not trying to take it. I'm trying to keep you out of trouble. They'll send people. John, real ones. With badges. John laughed bitterly. Let them come. I buried enough men with badges. Marcus stared at him, sadness clouding his face. You're not the only one trying to do what's right here. What's right? John turned, eyes blazing. You call it right to drag her back into a cage, to undo everything she's become. Do you think that's mercy? Marcus didn't answer. The silence that followed felt colder than the blizzard outside. Finally, Marcus stood. I'll give you a few days. After that, I have to report back. John's voice dropped to a low growl. You tell them she's dead. Marcus froze. John, I mean it. His hands were trembling, but his stare was steady. You tell them the storm took her. That's the truth they'll believe. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, You're crossing a line. Brother John looked down at Echo, now resting peacefully, unaware of the storm building around her. That line's been crossed a long time ago. Marcus walked to the door, the air between them thick with everything unsaid. Take care of yourself, he said softly. John didn't respond. Before stepping out, Marcus looked back once more. You saved her life, John, but don't lose yours trying to keep her. When the door closed, the cabin felt smaller. John stood there, listening to the echo of his friend's footsteps fade into the night. Then he looked at the sleeping dog, the flickering firelight reflected in her fur. His voice broke the silence. They're not taking you. Not again. Echo stirred, eyes half open, and gave a small, trusting sigh. Outside, the wind picked up a whisper through the pines, like the distant hum of a coming storm. And somewhere in that sound, John thought he heard Rex's voice again. Not a bark, not a ghost, but a reminder some battles never end. The snow had quieted overnight, leaving the world wrapped in a blanket of stillness, that kind of silence that almost hums in your ears. The storm had passed, but the cold had sharpened. Every breath John took crystallized in the air before vanishing into nothing. He slung his old rifle over his shoulder, pulled on the heavy coat, and whistled. Echo came bounding through the drifts, a streak of tan and black, tail wagging, eyes alive with purpose. All right, girl, John said softly, his voice rasping against the morning air. Let's go stretch our legs. They hiked up the ridge behind the cabin, the same path he and Rex had once walked years ago. The trees loomed tall and quiet, heavy with snow. The world up here didn't care who you were or what you'd done. It just was. John liked that. He needed that. For the first time in weeks, the thoughts in his head felt quieter. The trail wound higher, slick with frozen runoff. John's knees ached. His left leg, the one that still carried shrapnel from Kandahar, screamed with each step. But he pushed on, leaning on his cane, watching Echo leap and twist through the snow like she was born from it. Careful, he called out, smiling despite himself. It's all fun till you hit a rock, kid. Echo barked once sharp, playful before darting up the slope ahead. John laughed under his breath. Sure, if he paused for a moment to catch his breath, leaning on his cane, looking out across the valley below, the Rockies stretched endless, ancient, and white. Somewhere out there, he thought, Thomas the Ranger Maggie once loved. My teeth walked the same trails. That thought made him smile. He didn't hear the crack. The snow beneath him gave way, a sudden hollow shift, a flash of white, and then gravity took him. It wasn't a fall so much as a surrender. 1 second he was upright. The next he was tumbling, weightless, helpless. Snow and sky blurred together as the world spun around him. Then impact, pain exploded across his chest. His cane went flying. His head smacked something hard. Silence. When he opened his eyes, he was halfway down the slope, wedged against a fallen log. The pain in his ribs was sharp and deep, broken. Maybe his right leg twisted wrong. God, he groaned, trying to move. The world tilted. He coughed, and a thin line of blood painted the snow. Echo, he shouted. His voice came out cracked, weak. Echo. For a moment, nothing, just the wind. Then a bark. Far above him, another bark. Closer this time. He turned his head. Through the swirling flakes, he saw her at the top of the slope. Tail raised, ears pinned back, scanning the drop. Stay, he gasped, panic in his voice. Stay, Echo, don't. But she didn't stay. She came. Echo launched herself down the slope with reckless abandon, claws scraping, snow flying around her like shrapnel. She half slid, but never stopped moving, eyes locked on him the entire time. When she reached him, she barked frantically, circling, sniffing, whining. I'm okay. John lied through his teeth. Just a little banged up. He tried to pull himself up the slope, digging his gloved hands into the snow. His legs screamed in protest. He slid back down, cursing under his breath. Damn it, he hissed. Not like this. Echo barked again. Louder, desperate. Then she did something John would remember for the rest of his life. She bit the sleeve of his coat, not hard, just enough to get a grip, and pulled. Echo, his voice trembled. No, you'll. But she kept pulling, digging her paws into the snow, growling with the effort. Her muscles trembled. The snow beneath her claws gave way, but she didn't stop. John tried to help, pushing with his good leg, grabbing at anything solid. Inch by inch, foot by foot, they moved upward. Good girl, he gasped. That's it. That's it. The slope was steep, cruel. More than once he thought they'd both slide back down, but Echo refused to quit. Every pull, every bark, every growl was a command to live. When they finally reached level ground, John collapsed face first into the snow, chest heaving. Echo stood over him, panting, licking his face, whining softly. He reached up, weakly resting his hand on her neck. You did it, girl. His voice cracked. You saved me. He laughed, a broken, breathless laugh that turned into a sob. Rex did the same damn thing once, he whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. Dragged me out from the blast zone. I thought I didn't deserve to be saved back then. Echo nudged his face gently, whining again. John wrapped both arms around her, holding on tight. And now here you are, saving me again. He pressed his forehead against hers, voice trembling. Once again a dog pulled me out of hell. The words weren't just spoken, they were exhaled, released, like smoke from an old wound. It took him hours to limp back to the cabin, Echo never leaving his side. She carried his gloves, guided him across the ice, even stopped once to bark at him when he slowed too long. By the time they made it home, the sun had begun to set, the mountains glowing gold and pink. John collapsed into his chair by the fire. Echo curled up beside him, resting her head on his knee. He stared into the flames, eyes glassy, lost somewhere between memory and gratitude. Maybe, he said quietly, you weren't sent to remind me of Rex. Maybe you were sent so I could finally forgive myself. Echo lifted her head slightly, her amber eyes meeting his calm. Knowing, alive, John smiled through the tears. You're not a ghost, girl. You're the reason I'm still here. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. Not angry this time, almost tender. And for the first time in years, John Merrick felt something unfamiliar stirring deep inside him. Not regret, not guilt, but peace. It began with a knock on the door. 3 short raps. Shop. Official. Like a verdict. John froze. Echo lifted his head from the rug, ears twitching. Through the frosted window, John could make out 2 silhouettes, one tall, one shorter, both in dark coats. A black SUV waited in the snow, its engine humming like a low growl. He already knew who they were. When he opened the door, the cold rushed in, along with the badge. Mr. Merrick, Gayer, Agent Parker, Animal Control Enforcement. We'd like to ask you a few questions about a missing canine from a federal training facility. John's hand tightened on the doorframe. His heartbeat filled the silence between words. Echo stood behind him, motionless, only his breath visible in the air. I don't know what you're talking about, John said quietly. The agent held out a photo. It was Echo. Same eyes, same scar on the paw. We traced microchip activity near this area. Someone's been buying veterinary supplies. Food. A report came in from Dr. Marcus Lee. John's chest went cold. Marcus, he stepped aside, voice steady but brittle. You should leave, sir. Keeping this animal is a violation of Section 47B. These dogs belong to the Defense Department. They're not registered for civilian care. Yeah, John said, shutting the door slowly. Then tell the Defense Department to come get him themselves. The latch clicked. Outside, the wind howled. That night, Clara called. Her voice trembled over the static. Dad, what did you do? I didn't do anything. They called me, animal control. They said if you don't return the dog, you could face charges. He sighed. It's just another piece of paper. Clara, I've seen worse threats. This isn't the war, Dad, she snapped. You can't fight everyone forever. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Echo, sleeping by the fire, chest rising and falling in perfect calm. Please, Dad, Clara whispered, just do the right thing. You saved him once. Don't make worse. Her words cut deeper than any bullet. When the call ended, the cabin felt emptier than before. The fire crackled, soft and tired. John sat for a long time, staring at the photo frame on the mantel, the one with Rex beside him, both younger, both smiling. He reached out, thumb tracing the edge of the glass. I couldn't save you, he murmured. Not that day. His voice broke, but I won't fail him to. Not again. The next morning, Marcus came. He didn't knock, just stood outside in the snow, his truck idling behind him. John opened the door before he could speak. I didn't tell them, Marcus said quickly. They came to me with recollects. They already knew. John's jaw tightened. Then what do you want? A way out. Marcus stepped closer, eyes weary. There's an old training base north of here, Wolf Ridge. It's decommissioned, fenced off. I still have access. If you take Echo there, release him, the signal will go dead. No one will trace it back to you. John laughed bitterly. Release him? Into the wild. He'll die out there. No, Marcus said. He'll survive. These dogs are built for it. He'll be free. Free. The word hung in the air like frost. John looked past Marcus, the mountains, the endless white, the same wilderness that had both broken and healed him. He thought of Echo's eyes the first night he found him half frozen, barely alive, and the way those same eyes looked now, strong, loyal, full of trust. He turned away. You're asking me to betray him. I'm asking you to protect him, Marcus said softly, the way you couldn't protect Rex. That hit hard. Too hard. John's breath shuddered out. You think I don't know that? Marcus didn't answer. He just stood there, waiting, the snow falling between them like ash. Finally, John nodded. Wolfridge, he said. Tomorrow. They drove in silence the next day. The sky was gray, heavy with snow. Echo sat in the back seat, his head resting on John's shoulder. Every few miles, John reached back, fingers brushing the fur behind Echo's ear. He didn't speak because he knew if he did, his voice would break. When they reached the ridge, the world was nothing but white and wind. The chain-link gates hung half open, rusted and swaying. It looked like a graveyard of ghosts. John got out, the crunch of snow beneath his boots deafening in the quiet. Echo jumped down beside him, tail wagging. He didn't know. He couldn't know. John knelt in front of him, resting both hands on the dog's shoulders. Hey, he whispered. Remember that storm, the one where you found me? Echo licked his glove, whining softly. John's throat tightened. You saved me, boy, in more ways than one. He smiled faintly, tears cutting cold paths down his face. You were never mine to keep, but you were mine to love. He unclipped the collar, the one he'd fixed himself with an old leather strap. Echo tilted his head, confused. Go, John said. His voice trembled. Go on. The dog didn't move. He just sat there staring up at him. John swallowed hard. That's an order, soldier. For a moment, Echo hesitated, then turned, slowly, padding through the snow toward the tree line. He looked back once. Their eyes met, man and dog, soldier and savior. Then Echo vanished into the white. John stood there long after he was gone, the wind biting at his face, his heart hollow and loud in his chest. He whispered to the silence, You're free now, Echo. Then, after a pause, softer, like a prayer, maybe now, I am too. The storm came early that night. Snow fell thick as feathers, swirling through the mountain air like ghosts looking for a place to rest. Wolfridge was quiet, too quiet for a place that had once trained soldiers and dogs to survive the impossible. The sign at the gate still hung there, half buried in frost. The letters faded. Wolfridge Training Facility, nor trespassing, but John Merrick trespassed anyway. Marcus drove the old truck slowly up the hill, tires slipping on ice. The headlights carved a narrow tunnel of light through the white darkness. in the back seat. Echo sat upright, ears pricked, staring out the window as if he could sense something final about this trip. John hadn't spoken much since they left the cabin. He just held a small silver collar in his lap, a simple loop of metal engraved with 2 names, Rex, Echo. Marcus glanced over. "You sure you want to do this tonight?" John nodded. "If I wait till morning, I won't be able to." The truck stopped near the old parade field, a flat stretch of snow where rows of kennels once stood. Now it was nothing but broken fences and wind. John opened the door. The cold hit him like a wall, sharp enough to steal his breath. He limped around to the back and opened the door for Echo. "Come on, boy," he said softly. Echo jumped down, poise, sinking into the powder. He looked up at John, tail wagging, once uncertain, the way he used to when waiting for orders. John smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's cold. Guess it's just you and me again." He crouched, wincing as his knees touched the ice, and slipped the silver collar round Echo's neck. The metal gleamed faintly in the dark. "There," he whispered. "Now you carry both of us." Marcus stood a few paces away, watching but saying nothing. Some things didn't need words. John ran his hand along Echo's fur one last time. The dog leaned in, pressing against his palm, warm and alive. "Listen to me," John said. His voice trembled, not from the cold. "You've got a gift, Echo. Not the kind they train for, the kind they can't. You love without asking why. You forgive without being told to." Echo tilted his head, eyes glistening in the dim light. "Go live your life," John whispered. "Free. No chains. No orders." He hesitated, then added, voice breaking, "Go, son." It was the first time he'd ever called him that. Echo didn't move. He went softly, like he understood too much. John forced a smile. "Go on. That's an order." The wind howled across the ridge, carrying snow like ash. Finally, Echo turned slowly at first, then faster, trotting toward the tree line where the white met the dark. Halfway there, he stopped, looked back. For a heartbeat, everything held still, the wind, the snow, even time itself. Then Echo barked a single, sharp sound that cut through the night like a farewell, and then he was gone, swallowed by the storm. John stood frozen, staring at the empty woods. The silence that followed was unbearable, heavy, endless, absolute. His chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with age or weather. Marcus took a slow step forward, but the old soldier didn't answer. He just sank to his knees in the snow, hands trembling, head bowed. The silver flakes fell onto his shoulders, his hair, his face, like the sky itself was burying him in quiet mercy. He whispered, barely audible, "Goodbye, Echo." A tear slipped down his cheek, freezing before it could fall. For the first time in a long time, he let himself cry, not like a soldier, but like a man who had finally run out of wars to fight. Marcus watched in silence. He'd seen men lose brothers before, comrades, even parts of themselves, but this was different. This was a man saying goodbye to the last living piece of his heart. He walked up, placed a gloved hand on John's shoulder. "He'll make it, you know." John nodded slowly. "Yeah, he always does." They stayed there for a long time, 2 old soldiers standing in the snow, the world reduced to white and silence. Finally, John rose to his feet. He looked toward the woods one last time. The storm had swallowed everything, the tracks, the trees, even the light, but he could still feel him. Echo wasn't gone. Not really. Somewhere out there, a shepherd ran free across the ridge, carrying both their names, both their ghosts. John turned back to Marcus, voice steady now. "Let's go home." Marcus started the truck. As they drove down the mountain, John looked out the window, watching the snow blur past like falling memories. He whispered into the dark, "You saved me, Echo, just like Rex. Guess some angels wear fur." The truck's taillights disappeared into the storm, leaving Wolf Ridge behind, empty again, except for the echo of a single bark, still lingering in the wind. Snow fell gently that winter morning, blanketing the world in white silence. The mountains around Wolf Ridge looked softer now, as if time itself had laid a hand over their rough scars. And in a small wooden cabin at the edge of the ridge, John Hale sat by a crackling fire. His uniform jacket now bore a different patch, not the insignia of war, but the emblem of a rescue unit. He had been training new volunteers, teaching them how to find the lost, the stranded, the forgotten. Every morning he'd line them up, give them orders, bark a few old soldiers' phrases, and then end with a smile. A real one, the kind his daughter Clara hadn't seen in years. The nightmares hadn't vanished. PTSD doesn't just go away, but it's grown quieter, like an echo fading down a long tunnel, replaced by something gentler. Hope. Sometimes healing doesn't look like victory. It looks like showing up again even when the ghosts still whisper. It had been 1 year since that night in the storm, the night he let Echo go. Some nights, he still dreamed of the wolf dog, that look in its eyes before it vanished into the white. That look that said, thank you and goodbye. John often hiked back to Wolfridge after training. He'd stand near the old sign of the training camp, now half buried under snow, and whisper, "You're free, boy, that's all that matters." Sometimes he swore he could still hear a bark in the distance. Maybe it was the wind, maybe not. One evening, after the recruits had gone home, the world outside turned a deep, glowing blue, that strange color just before nightfall. The air was heavy with snow. John sat at his desk, writing in his old leather journal. The pages were filled with messy handwriting, memories, regrets, and lessons he wished he could have told his younger self. On one page he had written, "You can't save every life, but you can still choose not to give up on the next one." He closed the book, placed it beside the framed photo of Rex, his old military dog. The same dog whose death had broken him. He whispered, "I did my best, buddy. I hope you'd be proud." The fire snapped, filling the silence. Then a sound, at first faint, like the wind brushing through pines. Then clearer, a bark. John froze. The pen dropped from his hand. Another bark, closer now, deep and strong. He stood, heart pounding, and moved to the door. The snow had piled up against it, but he shoved it open with one hand. The cold hit him hard, the kind that cuts through bone, but he didn't care, because standing on the porch, framed against the falling snow, was Echo. The wolf dog had grown, its fur thicker, eyes brighter, muscles stronger. But those eyes, those same golden eyes, were unmistakable. Echo stood still, tail low but wagging slyly, as if unsure. John's breath caught. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the slow rhythm of snowflakes landing between them. Then John whispered, voice trembling, "You came back." Echo tilted his head, stepped forward, and pressed his muzzle into John's hand. The warmth of that touch, that living heartbeat, was enough to break something open inside him. Tears welled up. He fell to one knee in the snow, running his hand along Echo's neck, feeling the coarse fur that once carried both wildness and pain. Around Echo's neck glimmered something silver, the bracelet he had left behind that night. The one etched with Rex. Echo. He smiled through the tears. "Guess you kept it safe for me." They stayed like that for a while, no words, no commands, no leash, just the survivors, connected by something that didn't need explaining. Then, as suddenly as he came, Echo stepped back. He looked toward the forest the same way he had come, and let out one long, clear howl, a call of freedom. Then he turned, padding silently into the white mist of the trees. John didn't call him back this time. He just watched, hands still outstretched, until the shape of Echo disappeared between the snow-covered pines. He stood there for a long time, the wind carrying that last echo across the ridge. Then he went back inside, sat at the table, and opened his journal again. He took a deep breath and wrote, "Loyalty doesn't need a leash. It just needs a heart that remembers." He closed the book and placed it beside Rex's photo. Outside, the storm began to fade. You don't always get to keep what saves you. Sometimes, they just pass through your life long enough to remind you that you're still worth saving. Months later, when the rescue team went on a mission after another snowstorm, John walked at the front of the group. His step was steady, his eyes clear. The new recruits joked behind him, calling him Old Wolf. He just smiled, and somewhere in the distance, through the blizzard's roar, came a familiar bark, faint but proud, echoing across the ridge. He stopped, turned his head slightly toward the sound, and whispered, "I hear you, boy." Then he kept walking into the snow, into the light, into the rest of his life. Some echoes never fade. They live on, not in the mountains, but in the hearts that learned to listen.